Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we're going to bring you the most recent Bloomberg presidential poll and detail the blowout earnings from Tesla. But we begin with labor problems at Boeing. Factory workers have rejected a new contract. Let's get the very latest with Bloomberg's Lisa Mateo. Lisa, good morning.
Good morning, John. Yeah, this tentative offer, which would have increased machinists' wages by 35% over 4 years, it was voted down by 64% of union members who cast their ballots. Now, that was smaller than the 94% vote back in September, but it's still a setback for Boeing to get its operations back on track. CFO Brian West, he said the company expects to burn around $4 billion in cash during the fourth quarter. Now, that would bring the total free cash outflow to around $14 billion for 2024, and that's the worst performance since the pandemic affected air travel in 2020. Boeing shares right now down about 3%. Now, although this latest contract offer was a bump up from the initial 25% pay increase, the biggest sticking point for workers, reinstating their defined benefit pension plan. So for now, John, it's back to the negotiating table after 6 weeks of talks. In New York, Lisa Mateo, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Lisa, thank you. Well, another major story that we're following this morning involves our latest poll on the presidential race. And the contest between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris can't be much tighter. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has the latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll in Washington.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are now in a statistical tie among likely voters in each of the 7 swing states. Each candidate now has 49% support among likely voters, with a margin of error of 1 percentage point. So to move the needle, Trump's campaign is aiming to mobilize voters who haven't typically turned out. Harris has recently looked to fire up women and pick off moderate Republicans who aren't Trump devotees. Trump has an advantage on the economy. 36% of likely voters called the economy the single most important issue determining their vote. And Harris scores higher on mental fitness, honesty, and compassion. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Amy, thanks. And last night in the swing state of Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris spoke to undecided voters at a CNN town hall. She attacked Donald Trump, warning he's increasingly unfit for office, and criticized his past praise for dictators. And on the heels of a report in which Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, said Trump can be generally defined as a fascist, CNN's Anderson Cooper directly posed the question to Harris whether she thinks Donald Trump is a fascist.
Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted.
It marked the first time Harris used the word fascist to describe Donald Trump. She also took questions from the CNN audience, framing her campaign as one of compromise.
Whether it be what we need to do to actually invest in a substantial way in the industries of the future, in American-based manufacturing, in American-based industries where American workers and union workers have those jobs in a way that is good-paying jobs that gives people the dignity they deserve. Look, all of those areas I plan on working across the aisle and with Congress, including the issue of immigration, which we've got to fix.
Vice President Harris also vowed that she'd serve as a president for all Americans. Trump responded to Harris on social media saying she has a warped mind and sees that she is losing.
Meanwhile, John, the former president was in the battleground state of Georgia, holding a faith-based town hall in the afternoon and a rally in the evening. He reminded residents that Georgia offers early voting.
Whichever way you want to do it, I've been one that says whichever way, just get out and vote. Be a little careful, make sure your vote gets counted. There are ways of doing that, too.
And the Republican presidential nominee also criticized FEMA for its response to Hurricane Helene, saying FEMA and the White House did not do their job and, quote, we've got to change it. Trump heads west to Arizona and Nevada later today.
And turning to the markets, Karen, NASDAQ futures getting a big lift this morning following earnings from Tesla. Those shares are up 11% pre-market after the electric vehicle posted its best quarterly results in more than a year. Tesla's Cybertruck sales turned a profit for the first time. On the earnings call, the CEO Elon Musk promised to make Tesla the most valuable company in the world, starting with its vehicle sales targets.
I do want to give some rough estimate, which is I think it's 20 to 30% vehicle growth next year, notwithstanding negative external events.
Tesla CEO Elon Musk on the company conference call. Tesla's market value has soared by $80 billion this morning.
Well, on the flip side, John, shares of IBM, they're lower, down 4 1/3% this morning. The company reported underwhelming sales as it grapples with a slowdown in consulting demand. Expectations were high for IBM heading into earnings. The company's stock climbed to an all-time record earlier this month on the back of enthusiasm about Big Blue's software unit.
And in Europe, Karen, shares of Barclays trading at a 9-year high following the bank's latest earnings report. Let's go to London now and get the latest with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Ewan, good morning.
John and Karen, it's a beat from London-based Barclays on revenue and profit in the third quarter. Better than expected income from the bank's two biggest divisions, fueling a 5% increase in total revenues. Barclays finally delivering on its promise to boost its flagging returns. Things not so Gucci over at Kering. The French luxury group warning annual profit will fall to its lowest level since 2016. The continuing slump in Chinese demand for luxury hampering a turnaround of the group's biggest label, Gucci. But the turnaround story going better for consumer goods giant Unilever. Its shares higher today after reporting sales volumes up for a fourth consecutive quarter. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ewan, thank you. Well, we're also following shares of McDonald's this morning. They're seeing a bit of a rebound, up about 0.7% this morning. Yesterday, the stock dropped 5%. McDonald's supplier Taylor Farms is recalling some yellow onion batches produced in a Colorado facility in response to the deadly E. coli outbreak at the burger chain. McDonald's hasn't yet confirmed the source of the outbreak, and that has led to dozens of illnesses and 1 death and 10 hospitalizations across 10 states. It says that slivered raw onions that go into its quarter-pounder burger are the likely culprit of the contamination, though it has not ruled out beef as a potential source.
And Elliott Investment Management and Southwest Airlines are nearing a settlement that would avoid a proxy fight for control of the carrier's board. Bloomberg News has learned that Elliott and Southwest are discussing a framework that would result in the shareholder activists receiving several board seats, but less than a majority.
And John, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Keurig Dr. Pepper has struck a deal to acquire energy drink maker Ghost. The price tag, more than $1 billion. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Authorities stopped a threat against election security in Arizona. A man has been charged with terrorism for allegedly hanging white bags of powder from political signs and 3 shootings. Tempe Police Chief Ken McCoy.
Our Tempe police officers arrested 60-year-old Jeffrey Michael Kelly in connection with 3 incidents of shooting at the Democratic National Committee offices here in Tempe.
Police say the suspect had more than 200 guns. The Gaza Civil Defense says it's a catastrophic situation in northern Gaza, saying in a statement that citizens are now without humanitarian services. There continues to be heavy casualties from attacks carried out by the Israeli Defense Force. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling through the Middle East this week, pushing for a peace deal, but it looks like there's little hope for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, France pledged to provide a $108 million package to support Lebanon at an international conference today. President Emmanuel Macron said massive aid is needed to support the country where war between the Hezbollah militants and Israel has displaced 1 million people, killed over 2,500, and deepened an economic crisis. The CDC is now recommending a second dose of the latest COVID-19 vaccine for people 65 years and older. Dr. Celine Gounder is the editor-at-large for public health at the Kaiser Family Foundation.
The vast majority of COVID deaths we see today are among older people. So it's quite reasonable to be boosting older people at least twice a year or even 3 to 4 times a year, since the boost only lasts them about 3 months, especially older people living in nursing homes.
Dr. Gounder spoke to CBS. Automatic emergency braking systems on new vehicles are 50% better at reducing crashes at up to 35 miles per hour compared to vehicles as old as the 2017 models. That's according to new research from AAA. Researchers found that such safety systems in 2024 cars and trucks avoided 100% of forward collisions. Greg Brannon is AAA's Director of Automotive Engineering Research.
It was quite a big contrast with all of the current model year vehicles avoiding a collision entirely up to 35 miles an hour.
The AAA's Greg Brannon says, though, on the downside, current automatic emergency braking systems in vehicles are not at all effective in the night. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. It is time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here is John Stashauer. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Yankees just flew out to L.A. They'll work out today at Dodger Stadium, start the World Series there tomorrow with Aaron Boone very confidently starting his ace, Garrett Cole.
He's had those moments of truth and tough moments that he's been so good at answering throughout his time with us. And he's proven himself to be a big game pitcher, and we're obviously blessed to be able to give him the ball to get this thing started.
Dodger manager Dave Roberts may not have the same confidence in Jack Flaherty. He's made 3 postseason starts and 2 went poorly, but he did throw 7 shutout innings in the game 1 against the Mets. He'll be backed up by a very strong Dodger bullpen, helped by a Dodger offense that scored 37 runs in its 4 NLCS victories. The Jets have lost 4 in a row, but they're favored Sunday at New England. The Patriots have dropped their last 6. Hassan Reddick will play, just ended his long holdout. It'll be the second game for Devontae Adams. Just revealed that in the Jets' losing locker room last Sunday in Pittsburgh, Adams criticized his brand new teammates for not having enthusiasm on the sideline.
We don't have time, and I got to do whatever I got to do to help this team move forward. And lacking energy, that's a prerequisite to be able to go out there and have a good year or have a good play or whatever it is. So in my mind, it was something that I wouldn't have been able to sleep if I didn't speak up on it.
Another veteran wideout about to get traded. Deal in the works for DeAndre Hopkins to go from 1-5 Tennessee to 6-0 Kansas City. Chiefs have 3 injured receivers. Jameis Winston taking over as the starting QB in Cleveland for the injured Deshaun Watson. Carolina going back to Bryce Young. Andy Dalton broke his thumb in a car accident. Season opener for the Nets, a 120-116 loss in Atlanta. Trae Young scored 30 for the Hawks. Cam Thomas led Brooklyn with 36. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, John.
All right, John, thank you. And the sports update is brought to you by Audi. Visit your Tri-State Audi dealer today and get behind the wheel of the Audi model you've always wanted.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Yeah, it's now 5:13 on Wall Street. Well, the presidential contest between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris could hardly be tighter. The results of a new Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll are out. And to walk us through it, we're joined now by Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Kevin, good morning. Thanks for being with us. We looked at the swing states, the likely states that will determine the winner. Doesn't get much closer, does it?
No, it really doesn't. I mean, every poll we've seen, it just feels that closer and closer it gets, no matter how you look at it. So, I think, I can promise you that over the next 2 weeks, the phrase you are going to hear over and over and over from anyone looking at these results is it's all going to come down to turnout. And that's just clear ultimately what is going on here. This is settled into the exact kind of election everyone had always thought it would be, which is a 50-50 election in the states where that are going to end up deciding it, and there's sort of no way around those dynamics, and so it's going to very much come down to the voter enthusiasm and the ability of either candidate to turn out their supporters on Election Day.
As for the issue that may decide the race, I'm reminded of a phrase from an election some years ago. It's the economy, stupid. How do the candidates fare when it comes to the economy in voters' minds?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was always a place that was the biggest vulnerability for Democrats, given when people are feeling inflation pinch, it's the party in power that's going to get punished. You are seeing Kamala Harris close the gap a little bit. At least these poll results are suggesting that. So she's gaining some ground. And interestingly, you're also seeing some people sort of get slightly less pessimistic about where the economy is and what inflation's doing. But too much of this is simply baked in, and you've got a lot of people in these swing states who are looking at the price of groceries, the price of restaurants, these prices they're encountering in their every day in their regular lives, and that's still just difficult with wages not keeping up. And so, when it comes to who's going to steward the economy better, Trump still has a slight edge. It's just smaller than it used to be, and Kamala Harris has made a lot of inroads on that. And more importantly, she's also made some inroads on sort of the trust question and a number of other key areas. And so I think you're seeing the enthusiasm among female voters in particular for her is very high, and that could be a bit of an X factor that could perhaps not be fully reflected in these results. For Trump, it's actually almost the slight opposite issue, where you have a lot of enthusiasm, but these are often among voting groups, particularly young men, who historically don't vote at terribly high rates.
And let's focus on Pennsylvania, if we could, with 19 delegates at stake there. What were the specific results?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like all these, it is so close that you almost can't look at any one poll, even ours, as good as ours, of course, is, and say what it means. But it is showing that Harris has a bit of a lead in Pennsylvania. She's sort of leading by about 1.7 percentage points. But then if you look at the overall sort of 538 polling average, which is sort of the looking at the broadest collection of polls across from across all these different polling organizations, Trump's the one who has a very, very slight edge there. So you're seeing the tightening across all of this, and at some point, I think, we are getting to the place where the polling can only tell us so much, because it can't ultimately predict who's going to show up, who's going to vote. But the early voting numbers are showing, even higher numbers than we saw in the last election cycle. So there's clearly that effort that both parties are spending, the huge amounts of money they're spending to try to, get voters out there is having an impact already.
Can we divine from that early voting that turnout is going to be better than expected or higher than expected?
I mean, it's hard to tell because, obviously, if you're voting early, it means you're not voting on Election Day. But it has in the past showed that there has been a higher level of, in the past, higher early voting has translated into higher overall turnout. There's obviously 2020 was a high turnout election. I don't know if this one can be bigger or not, but given the amount of money that's been spent, the huge sums, the huge amount of emotions surrounding the race on both sides, I do think people are expecting it to be quite a turnout.
Kevin, real quick, how are these polling results likely to shape the campaign in the final days?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for Kamala Harris, you can see that she's going to be spending her time really in those blue wall states, Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. That's where she's really going to be focusing most of her efforts. She knows that that's ultimately the best, easiest path she has. And so she's going to be trying to make sure that those voters get to see her and that she gets to make her closing case there. Trump has really been a little more focused on sort of the bigger, splashier stuff and things that aren't really necessarily even targeted at swing states. He's got his Madison Square Garden appearance coming up in New York City. I think that sort of shows he's always been on a somewhat different track. The dynamics for him have always sort of worked out different than just about any other candidate. But I think ultimately both of them are going about their own way and trying to figure out how do you motivate, how do you excite, how do you and finally convince what have to be like the 4 remaining undecided voters in the entire country of the United States.
Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Kevin, thanks very much for being with us this morning. Karen.
All right, John. Well, we are watching Tesla this morning, of course. Those shares are up 11% in early trading. This after it delivered some blowout results, and that's helping futures this morning as well. S&P futures up 0.5% or 26 points. Dow futures are a little changed. NASDAQ futures up 0.8% or 158 points. The 10-year Treasury up 12/32, yield 4.19%. Yield on the 2-year 4.04%. NYMEX crude oil is up 1.9%, up $1.32 at $72.09 a barrel, while COMEX gold is up 0.8%, up $21.30 at $27.50.70 an ounce. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. John.
Bloomberg's Karen Moscow. Karen, thanks very much. Another major story we're following this morning, the blowout quarter from Tesla. Those shares up 11% pre-market. It's giving a boost to the tech sector overall. And let's get more analysis this morning. Bring in our next guest, Dan Ives, the senior tech analyst at Wedbush Securities. Dan, thanks very much for being with us this morning. Give us the highlights, as far as you can see them, of the quarter and the look ahead.
Yeah, this was a blowout quarter for Tesla, specifically margins. They've had all these price cuts the last year. That stopped. So now margins 200 basis points above the street. But the big thing, they gave huge guidance for next year, 20 and 30% delivery growth. This was an Aaron Judge-like quarter for Tesla.
Who is buying the Cybertruck, Dan? I can't tell how many they sold from this report.
Look, in terms of the Cybertruck, I mean, that continues to be, I think a strong product, but small today. I mean, if you look at it, it's a high-end buyer, but really for Tesla, it's now expanding the actual roadmap beyond the Cybertruck. We believe a sub-$30,000 vehicle comes out next year. That's going to be the key.
What are the prospects for some of the other businesses, specifically energy storage? Can you tell us more about that?
Look, energy was actually a very strong quarter, and it's actually been a very strong year. Tesla now is starting to really become the one-stop shop. And when you think about superchargers, you think about what's happening on electric vehicles. Clearly, we've had softer electric vehicle growth over the last year. But now you look at the energy business, you look at the storage business, and I ultimately believe the key growth for Tesla over the coming years is autonomous and AI. But when you look at this quarter, a huge rebound, huge step in the right direction, the bulls will feel good today. I think this is an inflection point quarter for Tesla.
Yeah, you look to the robo-taxi. Was that a flop for Tesla? What's happening on that front?
Look, I disagree with the flop. It's something that was there, and I've been to these events, for tech 25 years. I thought it was probably the top 3-4 events I've been to. Did it lack details? Yes. But in terms of the future, autonomous, robotics, Optimus, Tesla more and more is going to be more of an AI disruptive leader rather than just EVs. But again, investors, the knee-jerk reaction, disappointed. I think in years from now, this is going to be viewed as a historical event.
We also had promises of more affordable vehicles. Is that happening?
I think by a year from now, we have a sub-$30,000 vehicle. And that is going to really be music to the ears of the bulls because they're able to produce cars cheaper than anyone else out there. It costs roughly $20,000 for them to produce a Tesla. You go back 2-3 years ago, it was $35,000, $40,000. That's the key for Musk and Tesla going forward.
China is, if I'm not mistaken, one of, if not the biggest market for Tesla. What's the competition there, and what does the landscape look like for Tesla in China?
Yeah, about 40% of demand. China had a very strong quarter. Look, it's a Game of Thrones battle in China. You got BYD, you got NIO, domestic competition across the board. But you now are starting to see Tesla gain more and more share in China. That's a key market. It's the hearts and lungs of the story. But we're seeing positives there. And that is important for the long-term growth of Tesla, which is why I believe we're looking at a $1.5 trillion market cap over the next year and a half.
In the earnings result, there was a spike in the regulatory tax credits. Is that a reliable recurring source of revenue for Tesla?
Look, it's a source of controversy, over the years. It's essentially almost a subscription model for them. I mean, it's going to ebb and flow. I don't think investors give it that much credit, but it's not going away. And I think it just shows, you talk about the energy business, you talk about regulatory. It's all parts of really what's becoming just a multifaceted Tesla under Musk.
What did you take away from Elon Musk in the conference call, specifically as it relates to a possibility taking a role in a Trump administration?
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of the business, it was probably the most bullish earnings call we've had from Tesla in the last few years. in terms of it's get the popcorn out, right? Because the next few weeks, I mean, if Trump does win, Musk will have a major role in that administration, adding to everything else he does between SpaceX, Tesla, and others. And look, that's a double-edged sword, right? In terms of him getting into politics, I think now we need to see how this all plays out. Given it's Musk, you never know what's coming in the next 24 hours.
And Dan, in the minute we have left, we're getting most of the Magnificent Seven reporting earnings next week. Give us your outlook, if you would.
I mean, I think get the popcorn out. I mean, it is going to be a robust earnings season for tech. I think because you have an AI revolution being led by godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA. It's something we haven't seen in 40 years. And now the next stage takes over. That's where I think you have strength from Microsoft. I believe from Apple, despite all the noise, it is the beginning of now AI coming to consumers with iPhone 16. This is going to fuel tech higher. It's why we believe it's 9 p.m. in this AI party that goes to 4 a.m.
I'm surprised you didn't do a baseball metaphor, Dan. Anyway.
It's an Aaron Judge-like quarter. And again, Yanks in 5.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.